Welcome to Washington Post Live. I'm David Ignatius, a columnist for the Post. I want to welcome you today to a special series we're running this week on the path forward combating COVID-19, in which we'll be looking carefully at vaccines. It's my pleasure to welcome this morning our guest, Paul Hudson, the Chief Executive Officer of Sanofi, a leading French pharmaceutical company that has one of the leading vaccine candidates for COVID-19 in development. Welcome, Paul. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Very happy to be part of it.
So we've had vaccines in the news this week to an extraordinary extent with the announcement by Pfizer of its phase 3 trial success, reported 90% prevention rate. And Dr. Anthony Fauci, our infectious disease expert, not a man usually given to hyperbole, said this week the results are really quite good. I mean, extraordinary. That was pretty strong language for Dr. Fauci. And I want to ask you if you would help us decode this news that we've all focused on, the financial markets certainly have. As somebody who's an expert in this field, tell us how to interpret this news, what's been achieved here, what's still necessary to be achieved to show safety and efficacy.
So first of all, it's thrilling news. I mean, huge congratulations to Albert, the whole team at Pfizer, their partnership with BioNTech. You've seen over the media coverage over the last 24 hours how simply relieved in many cases the people are. I've been around many people who've been saying, when will a vaccine come? Will a vaccine come? What we have to accept is that whilst Pfizer are showing a very strong sign they will get over the finishing line, they won't be able to do it on their own. And we applaud all of their efforts, but I think we also have to accept it's going to take more companies getting over the finishing line to produce the volume of vaccines needed to get the world back to normal.